The sun had barely risen over the wide, open land when Elijah returned to the ranch his family had owned for generations. This land was not just soil and grass. It was memory, legacy, and the bloodline of resilience that his ancestors had poured into every acre. Yet, as his truck pulled into the driveway, the suspicious glare of a neighbor fixed on him as if he were trespassing. That neighbor was Karen, the self-appointed guardian of the HOA, whose narrowed eyes carried both entitlement and suspicion. To her, his presence was an intrusion, though he was standing on the very ground that had been his long before a homeowners association even existed. Within minutes, her phone was in hand, her voice sharp with indignation, summoning the police as if his blackness alone were proof of wrongdoing. Elijah remained still, his heart heavy but his spirit unshaken. He knew this moment was bigger than a false call to law enforcement. It was the same story replayed through history. Black men criminalized for existing, for belonging, for owning what was rightfully theirs. But what Karen didn't know was that Elijah wasn't just a ranch owner. He was a man who oversaw every HOA in the country. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the quiet morning, pulling up like a judgment delivered before a trial. Officers stepped out, their hands resting on holsters, eyes already reading him as a threat rather than a landowner. Karen stood nearby with folded arms, rehearsing her story of fear and intrusion. Elijah watched silently, his calm presence standing in stark contrast to the hostility aimed at him. He had been through this before, too many times to count, treated like a suspect in places where his roots ran deeper than the oak trees surrounding him. But this time was different. This was his ranch, his heritage, and his right. As the officers approached, Elijah pulled out documents, proof of ownership, legal rights, and authority that stretched far beyond what they could imagine. For while Karen believed she had summoned the law against him, she had in truth called down the law to stand before her. Elijah wasn't just another black man to be dismissed. He was the chairman who oversaw the entire network of HOAs across America. The irony of it pulsed in the air, invisible but undeniable. As history tilted toward justice in that moment, the officers paused, uncertainty flickering across their faces as Elijah calmly explained who he was. His voice carried no anger, only a steady weight of truth. "I am the man who oversees every HOA in this country," he said, each word deliberate, each syllable cutting through Karen's fabricated tale. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the balance of power had shifted entirely. Karen's smirk faded into silence, her arms loosening as reality dawned. For too long she had relied on privilege to weaponize the system, certain her word would outweigh his dignity. But Elijah stood firm, embodying generations who had fought for the right to exist without justification. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply revealed the truth, and in that truth, the weight of justice pressed down on every witness there. The ranch around him seemed to echo his ancestors' voices, whispering that they had endured so he could stand here today, not as a victim, but as a leader with authority that could no longer be denied or dismissed. Karen stumbled over her excuses, insisting she didn't know and that she was just trying to protect the neighborhood. But her words sounded hollow, stripped of power. The officers, once ready to act on her call, now stood in quiet respect as Elijah detailed the history of this land, his family's ownership, and the oversight role he played in shaping HOAs nationwide. For the first time, Karen was forced to face the reality that her assumptions, her fear, and her bias had turned her into the trespasser, not on land, but on dignity itself. The neighbors who had gathered on porches and sidewalks looked on, some with shame, others with admiration. Elijah did not humiliate her. He simply let truth stand tall beside him, unshakable and undeniable. The story was no longer about Karen's call or even the officer's arrival. It was about reclaiming narrative, about showing that strength does not always need raised voices. It sometimes needs only the quiet, steady presence of a man who refuses to bow under the weight of prejudice. As the police cars pulled away and silence returned to the ranch, Elijah stood where his ancestors once had, feeling both the burden and the blessing of their sacrifices. This land had seen sweat, struggle, and injustice, but it had also seen triumph and resilience. Today added another chapter, not of defeat, but of dignity. Karen retreated, her authority shattered, her power revealed as nothing more than a fragile mask. The neighborhood would remember this day, not as the day a man was falsely accused, but as the day truth exposed prejudice and justice wore the face of calm courage. Elijah looked out across the ranch, the horizon stretching wide, and felt the pride of carrying forward a legacy no one could erase. He knew challenges would continue, that racism and suspicion still lingered in many hearts. But he also knew this. He had shown the world that identity and dignity cannot be erased, that power built on truth is stronger than fear. His story was not just his own. It was a testament to every Black life that had been tested, doubted, and yet stood tall.